not being able to go outside gives you a lot of free time to do the important things in life, like watching films.
I always thought I could protect her. What took her from me is still out there.
So we saw The Headhunter. It's a film that came out last year or 2018, around then, but it's an indie film. It had a very low budget of $30,000, which, if you know anything about filmmaking, that is an insanely low budget.
Yeah.
So to make anything that resembles a real film for that price, you're doing a pretty amazing job.
In the film, you follow Father, and I'm not even joking about that. If you look in the credits, they are labeled as Father. Like, that's just his name, which I think from a screenplay standpoint isn't a very good sign. But we can talk about that later. And then he also has a daughter whose name is Daughter. So it's a very simple premise. He is a Viking Skyrim kind of person. And then very quickly through the opening act, you learn that his daughter gets killed by a monster. And then he wants to avenge his daughter.
So he goes around killing all the monsters in the land. He just kind of lives in this little shack. And we see him always off screen fighting monsters. We never actually see anything on screen, which was kind of a big complaint of mine. So as he supposedly is killing monsters that we never see, he is healing himself when he gets wounded with his magic liquid that he can pour on any wound and it becomes healed. And then one day, through the prodding of fate, that little jar tips over and it resurrects one of the monsters he's killed, who then turns into this fearsome beast for him to hunt, which eventually comes back to be his downfall.
Well, and also the interesting part about it is that the monster that he kills, that's the last monster, is the one that killed his daughter. That's why it's such a big deal to him.
Right.
And, knowing that it's an independent film, I feel like, at least for me, I give it a little bit of slack. But usually I say with indie films, if you're going to do an indie film, don't go the fantasy route. Just don't do it. Like, you don't have the budget. It's going to be difficult. All of your shots are going to be in forests. And and there's gonna be no buildings, but there's a lot of parts like his house and I don't know how they got that castle. Like, I don't know if it was actually shot in the U.S. or not. They do a little bit more than just the average fantasy B movie from the 1990s, and it has some strengths in that, but you still get these heavy-handed things where you're just like, wow, this really is an indie film.
Yeah. I think this was a great 10-minute short.
I agree. Yes, I agree. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was rewatching it, and I was going through it, and I thought, the way that I can give a review of this film is it feels like the Hobbit series, but not good at all. Because in the Hobbit movies, it's this material that's stretched out. It's a 300-page book that's stretched out across 3 films. This is just one idea, and it feels like that they're really just meandering along to try to fill that gap.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of information that could have been communicated to me should have been communicated much faster, but then they wouldn't have had an hour and 10-minute movie, because I think that's the running time.
Yeah, which was far, far, far too long. I for what it is, there's a neat little story that could satisfyingly fill like a 10-minute short film. There is nothing in here to justify the length that it's at, except from the marketing perspective of, hey, look, we only have this much money. If we can make a full-length feature out of this, we're going to get headlines. People are going to talk about us, which, there's probably something to that, because how many people watch shorts? Very few. That's kind of the problem.
Yeah, but I feel like that if you made a fantasy film and you actually spent more money trying to make a great monster, just one monster, instead of all these other ones, because you don't have any of these other monsters. Like, you never really see them on screen. Like you said, like, you see one, but it's laughable. You just see the head. Like, he looks through his window and it's the head, but it's so obvious that it's just on a pole or something like that. But that's its main downfall, is that it keeps on trying to feel ambitious and big. And with independent films, if you want an independent film to be, if you want it to soar, if you want it to get noticeable, the main thing you really have to do is have a great screenplay. Like, I think that every single film should have a great screenplay, and most films don't do that. You have to also have the compelling monsters, compelling fantasy land, and it didn't hold up in that regard, so they kind of backed themselves into a corner in that regard.
Yeah, I agree. There's so many scenes that just nothing is happening. You know, he's just looking around the landscape. He's just walking really slowly. Oh, it's really dark. And they have, there's several scenes at the beginning that show him like kind of fighting monsters and then healing himself. You only need to show that once. You need to show once that he uses the liquid to heal himself.
Yeah.
And then we get it. Like, oh, it's a magic life liquid. And then when it dumps on the head, we know what's going to happen.
Yeah,
They spent like half an hour getting to that point or something. It was crazy. I could easily envision an edit of this that is 10 or 12 minutes long that is perfectly fine. You know, it's a nice, fun little thing. But you'd have that moment happen like 3 minutes in, not 35 or something.
That was the main issue I had with the film, was that the main struggle for the main character doesn't come in until 30, 40 minutes into the film.
Yeah.
Also, that just didn't really feel strong emotionally. Like in the very opening shot, you have him looking around and, you know, he's going to go protect his daughter. And then they keep on doing this wide shot of him that just walks off screen. And of course, and it's just, okay, I guess he killed something, but the tension is not effective. There's another scene where they use this wide shot that is just so inappropriately used, and I laughed at it. When he goes into his house, and then the monster leaves, and then he comes back in, and it's a wide shot of him looking at the jar, looking down at the ground, and then looking back up. And usually with wide shots like that, you're communicating such a comedic element because you're seeing the full body. You know, I would have had a close-up of him going like, oh, crap. It's alive, but this one, it just felt really funny.
Yeah. I think the off-screen stuff, that's my biggest direct criticism, is like, there's no action you actually see. Sure, you can have a couple fights off screen or something, but you don't see anything happen on screen to the degree that it feels like you ordered a meal and they bring you a clean plate, and you're like, wait, where's my food? And, oh, we already ate it.
Yeah. Oh, you know, it's like Jaws. You never see the shark. You're like, well, yeah, but you eventually see the shark. I like the idea of the psychological element of it, where the monster is still ahead and it needs to find a new body to attach itself to, and the grave of the daughter is near his house, and so the monster goes and adapts the body of the daughter and such. But even then, there's no real fight with this monster at all. I feel like that you could have spent your budget trying to make at least a decent looking thing to have, you know, towards the end. But then at the end of the film, he just fights in some cave and tears the monster out of the body, and it's just it's flapping around, and it's just not scary. Like, there's no emotion.
Yeah. There's no emotion at all. I mean, for most of the movie, he's basically a single-minded monster hunter. It didn't do much for me, really.
I don't know. I like the idea of the monster going and obstructing his personal ground. I found that intriguing. Yep. But my issue with it is that there's a lot of things in here that really just didn't help the emotion at all. So continuously throughout the entire film, he goes back to his daughter's grave. I think he goes back about 3 times. And every single time he goes up to it, he keeps on throwing something on it. He doesn't place it down onto the grave like flowers or, oh, my poor daughter. He just tosses it onto his grave. And, you know, that just goes more into my complaints about budget for a fantasy film. It's the grave is underneath a tree, and you just see these stones that are just kind of conveniently piled there. It doesn't look like that they're overgrown or anything. At least in, you know, Lord of the Rings, they built the Shire and then they left it for a year so that things would grow up around it, so that it actually looked like that it was been there forever. For this, you know, you could have just thrown some dirt, maybe some mud, done a little bit more with it. And this just keeps on reoccurring. Like, there's another scene when he's stirring his food and he's using a stick. And I hate that, because that just means that they just went and grabbed a stick off of a branch and then they just used that. You know, you could have gone somewhere and then just gotten like a wooden ladle and then just carved it down or something like that, like made it look more authentic to the time, instead of just using a stick.
You want to think, well, we got to forgive it for certain things like that, but
the issue with it is that these issues are compounding now because of its budget. So it's, if there was a stronger narrative, it really wouldn't have bugged me so much. But actually, at the same time, it still bugs me so much just because I see this so much in fantasy independent films, where it's a forest and there's no buildings and you have to use whatever is there, and I just see it so much, and I just wish it wasn't there.
Yeah. I feel like when you have a budget, you need to sit down and think, okay, what can we do with this budget? What is achievable with this budget? And I don't think that an hour plus long fantasy movie is really achievable with that budget. Like,
the cinematography is gorgeous in some aspects.
It's overall good looking, but that's really the best thing I could say about it.
Yeah, and even then, the cinematography isn't. I mean, it's good when it is good, but there's some points when it's really bad. For example, when the last monster shows up and he's in the dark, I could totally see the ISO. They cranked up that ISO so high. And then when he goes into the cave to fight off the monster, if you look at that shot, you can definitely tell that there's just a light pointed down in the water and it's shining up. And it's not the moonlight. It looks like an LED light that they just pointed to the ground, and now it's shining everywhere. It's just amazing, and that occurs multiple times throughout the film.
Yeah. I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more if it had been much shorter. So one of two things: if you do have a more complicated story that's more interesting, I think that necessarily makes it harder to do with this budget because you got to have more things happening. I'm not sure that's the best solution on its own. Like, obviously, I'm in favor of a better script, but I think probably the more doable solution would be to make it very short, to have at least one good action scene at the climax or something. Not have it just be like almost a running gag that everything is off screen.
Right. I do agree it would have been a lot better if it was shorter. And in that regard, they could have spent more money towards the monster. But it could have still worked this way. It's just that I think that they needed to either get more money or spend their money in better areas because this film could have worked. It actually could have stood out if it actually had good effects in it. Because if it didn't have a good script, then at least it could have had good monsters, and it didn't have good monsters. It didn't have any good fights. It didn't have anything else. So if there's no script and there's no good monsters, and the cinematography is okay, that's not enough for me to stick around.
Right. Like, I think the glimpses of the monsters that we saw were fine. There was like, the little head thing, and there's like the goop in the jar, like, so the effects like that. I thought they were fine enough, but there just was so few of them. It was all in the dark. We can't see it, or it's off screen.
If you're going to do something like this, you need to hire someone who knows what to do with makeup or prosthetics. Put a guy in a rubber suit. It might look a little corny, but I mean, it won't look horrible.
I would have preferred that too. Yeah. It would have just been more interesting. It's like so much of the movie, I was just like losing interest, and that's always a bad sign.
Yeah, when you're not feeling anything. Because there's so many points in it when you feel like that, there's going to be an emotional beat that's going to happen, but it never did. I will say that it did have good setups and good payoffs, though.
For like which things?
So there's a routine that he goes into when he gets steaks, and then he puts them into the wall, and then that means that he's going to go hunt, right? And then he comes home and he puts the heads on there, and then when he's going to go fight the last monster, then he's putting up a stake, and then he accidentally gets a splitter on it, and then as he's leaving, the camera rack focuses onto the actual stake, and then you see his blood dripping on it. And then you're like, okay, all right, I can see that he's probably going to die at some point, so that was good. And then at the end of the film, you see that literally his own head gets put onto the stake. And I was like, okay, that's nice. And then the same with the jars, because they kept on showing us that flapping...
The shutter?
Yeah, the shutter. I thought that was good payoff when they kept on having the shutter, and it kept on going, and you're just like, why do they keep on showing us the shutter? And then they finally show us, and that was... I felt like that it had some strong elements in the screenplay, but overall it just wasn't as strong.
But I mean, that's what you can do with an indie film. I mean, any indie film is going to have limitations. The question is what you do with them, how you work around them, and how you make the most of what limited resources you have. I've worked with low budget productions before, and it's difficult.
But it's all about knowing what you're confident in, what you can do, what you think you can't do. I don't understand what his obstacle really is, because he seems pretty capable of killing monsters. Like, I never really saw that he had much of an issue until the monster got to his daughter. But even then, he still seemed capable of doing it.
Yeah.
What do you think of the twist at the end?
When he got killed?
Yeah.
More off-screen BS. It's just like this static camera shot, 1 minute and 15 seconds. You're looking at the guy's kitchen, and you hear him walking around outside, and then you hear a scuffle for 1 minute and 15 seconds. That's all that happens. My experience as an audience member for that was a feeling of helplessness, which, it can be kind of interesting. Like, we're not getting all the shaky cam or something for an action scene. To have the camera passively recording some horrible thing, it make you feel like you're powerless to stop it, and it's kind of a horror there, which can be really effective. But in here, it was like kind of mixed with frustration, because I'm like, really? You're not going to show us the freaking climax where he gets killed by the monster or whatever? God.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the movie Youth?
Youth? No, I haven't seen that.
Okay. It's with Michael Caine, and it has a great example of that. Spoilers for whoever wants to see that film. So in the movie, Michael Caine has a friend, and essentially his friend commits suicide. And instead of showing the suicide, the camera pans past the suicide because you see him, he's about to jump off, and then it goes towards Michael Caine, and then you just hear the guy's body splat on the ground, and then all you see is just Michael Caine's reaction. And I feel that in that moment you get such a more powerful reaction, because it's not necessarily seeing the dead body, it's seeing what one of his friends how his friend is reacting to the situation. And that would have been fine with this case, but they never show the monster. It's it's kind of like a friend that has an annoying trait about them, and you accept them for who they are, but they keep on doing it, and then it's like, oh, you're doing it again. Can you stop, please?
It happened every time there was a monster fight. There was like only that little scuffle near the end that was it all on screen, and it was, not the greatest fight scene ever.
Yeah. I would definitely say that it would be better if it was shortened.
Yeah, so I'd only recommend it as something of interest to someone who's interested in like making low budget indie movies. If you want to see how someone can do a low budget indie movie and you're just looking for movies like that, this it's a good looking movie that has a very low budget. You can take lots of stills from it and go, whoa, that actually looks like a real movie, which is kind of neat. But I think it also is instructive to show how many marks are being missed, and because of compromise, I'm sure if they had a big budget, they'd love to show the action, all more story and stuff. I can only assume that this is because of the compromises they made for the budget. And from that perspective, I think it's instructive to look at it and say, oh, I see, the limitations that you can run into in making an indie movie. So I didn't enjoy it really, but I think it could be interesting, from that perspective.
I agree, Chris. I agree. It's a good film for people who want to get into filmmaking, to learn about what you should and should not do in filmmaking, how hard it is. Like, if you're thinking about making your first film and do a fantasy, just watch this and see how difficult it is. Yeah. And it also just kind of helps you understand. I think this is a good film to learn about budgetary restrictions and what it can and can't do for your film. Now, I still applaud the people for making it, because making films is hard, and putting your vision on screen is really difficult. I didn't enjoy the film, though, but I mean, at least they made something. So, catch us.
Catch? What do you mean catch? Are you infected?
I don't know. I might be. I'm still not sure. I'm on the 5th day.
Yeah, and we do have some episodes that we recorded in November that we've been meaning to get up, so we'll be probably posting those as well. But these audio ones will be quick and easy for us to get out, so look forward to more of these.
Yeah, and this was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to doing this again very soon.
Yep. All right. See you guys soon. Good talking to you, man.
Yeah, good talking to you too.